Hey there, my name is Madison. This is my sidekick Walter, and these are my best books of 2022. I was asked to be on some friends' podcast. It's called Checked Out and Overdue. I will link it in the description. The whole premise of the episode I was asked to be on was, what were your favorite, not just favorite, your top 3 books of 2022, which I was personally offended they asked me to choose 3 because it was literally an impossible task. I could not do it. I mean, I kind of did do it, but I also very much cheated. And you'll see why, because I have way more than 3 books to talk about today. They asked me to do 3, and I said, well, what if I did top 3 in a bunch of different genres? I think I ended up talking about like 14 books on that episode instead of 3. So let's talk about them more today. I also have a few more that I didn't talk about on the episode that I want to talk about today because there were just so many good books that I read and I can't stop thinking about them. So without further ado, let's do it. I've broken my favorite books of 2022 down into 5 different categories. I've got a fantasy-ish / just fiction ? It's mostly fantasy. I guess I have one that is a romance book, but it doesn't read like a typical romance book, so I put it in this category. Then I have a romance category second. I have a graphic novels section because I just got into graphic novels this year. And then my nonfiction section. Let's go through each of the categories and see what we got. Starting with romance. First off, we have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I was so excited for this book. I love Emily Henry. I love everything she does. Emily, I love you. I love you. So I was really excited for this book to come out. I pre-ordered a copy and this was just, I held off reading it. I didn't read it right away because I just knew I was gonna love it and I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to not have it like to read. So I waited a little bit and then I finally read it. I was laughing, I cried. If you follow me on Instagram at Reading Rainbow, you saw me literally weep over this book. I am a sucker for good banter, and holy cow, Nora and Charlie's banter in this was just so good. It was so good. I loved this one. The spice was good. It's not the spiciest book I read this year, and we will get there. But it was just a classic Emily Henry. It's a romance, but then these like kind of family issues and deeper issues. It was just great. It was really great. I really loved it. So one of my top 3. Another one in my top 3 is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Now this was one I actually picked up because Emily Henry had posted it on her feed on her Instagram talking about how good this was. This book follows Florence Day, who is a ghostwriter for this very popular Nora Roberts-esque writer. And not only is she a ghostwriter, but she can see ghosts. Her father is a funeral director, runs a funeral home. He can also see ghosts, and this has been passed on to her, so it's the special thing they share. And then her dad dies. It's really sad. So she has to go back home to this hometown where she's been avoiding it for so long because she had a rough time growing up, being able to see ghosts and not knowing how to communicate that to people who can't see ghosts. There's a little romance with her editor, and I just love this one. To me, this felt like a beach read if, you know, during beach read, January is struggling with her dad leaving on kind of these bad terms, like dying and then having this huge secret exposed that really just changed how she felt about their relationship. Whereas in Dead Romantics, Florence and her dad had this really beautiful, gorgeous relationship, and she really misses her dad the whole time, especially because of the connection they had. And so it really dealt with grief, but you know, grief of losing this loved one and not being mad at them, I guess. This was a really beautiful book. I cried a lot. I laughed a lot. There were 2 spicy scenes in this, so not a spicy book at all. One where there was no touching and one where there was touching. The non-touching one was hotter than the touching one, which was new and good. It was good. So yeah. Okay, my third one is A Certain Appeal by Vanessa King. So the way that I describe this book is Pride and Prejudice meets burlesque. It is this absolutely gorgeous retelling of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice within the scene of burlesque. So we follow Bennett, who she is a kitten for this burlesque club. Her best friend Jane sings at the club. The club that they work at is potentially being bought by this Mr. Bingley. He has his friend Darcy, you know, he's grumpy and kind of hard to get a read on, and it was just the perfect retelling of Pride and Prejudice in a way that it's the story I know and love, but it was just so perfectly different in the sense of the retelling that it was, like the spin it put on it without straying so far from the original story. The burlesque scene was just so perfect for it. Oh my gosh, the spice is so good. It's so good. I think I read this book in an evening. I absolutely devoured it. 10 out of 10, so good. Please, if you read any of the books I recommend, there are like 2 that I'm like, please read this book, and it's this book. Please, 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 please read A Certain Appeal. I have one honorable mention. See, I can't even keep to a top 3 in a genre, but it's too good not to recommend. It's Lease on Love by Fallon Ballard. This book really surprised me. It's this kind of forced proximity, roommates to lovers. It's this young woman who needs a place to stay. She wants to start her own floral business. She happens upon this ad with this kind of loner, quiet guy who kind of hides himself away in his basement in a not creepy way at all. He's like the sweetest guy. And they become friends, and it's just so sweet and wholesome, but not wholesome. I loved this book. It was like so unexpectedly spicy for how sweet it was. Could not get enough. Have reread parts multiple times. So honorable mention, Lease on Love, Fallon Ballard. Next, we have my fiction section. I don't know what to call it. So my first one in this, which again is almost a romance book, is Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. This is her self-published version. It's now being published mainstream, I guess. This cover is gorgeous. I don't know why they didn't keep it. Anyways, this is about 2 people in Chicago who meet at an art institute, and it's about their lives a little bit before, but then after they meet and because they meet, what their lives are like. Olivia Blake's writing is just, it's stunning. It transports you. It is beautiful and painful. The things that she talks about and describes, she describes things so well. I really don't want to say too much about this book. I don't want to give away too much. It does deal a lot with, you know, what is it like for 2 people who have very different mental health issues, disorders? How do they work through those personally and then together, and how does that affect not only each person individually, but the friendship, the partnership that they have? This was just really great. I really want to reread it this year to just highlight and tab all of the absolutely incredible quotes in this book. So, Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. The rest of these are like fantasy, and then I have one sci-fi honorable mention. My next one is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This is a debut freaking novel, which blows my mind, because this book does not read like a debut. It is so good. So good. It is this kind of sweeping epic about this girl who is, as you guessed it, the daughter of the moon goddess. Her mother is trapped on the moon where they live. She's forced to flee for fear of discovery. No one knows she exists. And so she really wants to find a way to free her mother. This is a story that's inspired by a Chinese legend, which is really cool. And because of that, it's really unlike any fantasy I've ever read. There is so much that happens in this book. It does emotionally feel like too much, but when you're in the middle of it, I mean, you fly through it. It doesn't feel necessarily overwhelming. It's very well paced, and it's just so good. It is so good. Just read it, okay? Please read it. This is another one. If you read anything I recommended, Please read this book. Last in my top 3 for fiction, which is also fantasy, is The Starless C by Erin Morgenstern. So I read this in like a buddy read with my friends McCarley and Grace. Grace is on YouTube too, Bird by Bookish Bird. McCarley Jane Reads on Instagram. I could not tell you a single thing about what happened or what it means, but I loved every second of it. Just another instance where the writing is so transportive, you are fully immersed. I felt like I was in each harbor and the libraries and the books and the rooms, and it was insane. It was stunning. It's definitely a like Inception type novel. It's just a story within a story within a story told in this story. The cover is so pretty. I love whatever this part of the book is called. This is another one I really want to reread so that I can highlight and tab all my favorite quotes. So those are the top 3. And then I also have a few honorable mentions. So the first one is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. This is definitely more YA than Daughter of the Moon Goddess. And this is a magical feminist retelling of a classic Korean legend. Perfect for fans of Uprooted and Miyazaki's Spirited Away, which, yes, totally, 100% agree. And this follows a young girl who sacrifices herself to save the woman his brother loves, and then she has to try and save the sea god. This was just, I could not put it down. From the get-go, was instantly hooked. I loved the story. I loved our main character, and the romance was so good. And again, it was so YA, but as soon as I finished it, I had to get my hands on it. My last honorable mention is a sci-fi, and that is Illuminase, which is the first in the Illuminate files. This is unlike any book I have ever read, and this kept me thinking about this book and the things that happened in this book for like weeks. I could not stop talking to my boyfriend about it. I was intrigued and like a little scared and freaked out. It was so good. The most unique thing about this book is the way it's told. So it's told through all of these documents. It's a file about this catastrophic event that occurs, and it's just telling you the story following 2 characters, but it tells you this story from so many perspectives. I just love the layout, and like, it's just so cool. So it's a thick book, but because it's not text in the traditional sense, it does read very quickly. This one, I think about it a lot. Very good, very fun. It's a trilogy. I don't know if you can see the second and third. Haven't read them yet, but that's a 2023 goal. Okay, 2 more categories. Let's do nonfiction. One of my goals for 2022 was to read minimum 1 nonfiction book a month, because I am very solidly a fiction gal, very solidly a fantasy romance gal, and I really wanted to read more nonfiction. That was my goal. I think I pretty much did it. I don't think I read nonfiction in July and August. They were kind of bad months. But I also read more than 1 most months, so that was really cool. I read a lot of memoirs, I read a lot of poetry, and then I also read just informational nonfiction. I have 3 of my favorites. The first of the 3 that I read was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. John Green is well known for his YA novels. This is his first nonfiction. It's a collection of essays reviewing things in the Anthropocene, which is the current geologic age. So he literally just takes things like Diet Dr. Pepper and Canadian geese, and he rates them on a 5-point scale, which is something very unique and novel to the Anthropocene age. He makes all of these connections, which are very much, centered on his life and experiences. They were just so good. I was laughing, I was crying, I was learning. It was just such an incredible thing to read. This is a book I want to read every year. I did listen to it as an audiobook, which he narrates, and it was so good. And part of that is because this is based on a podcast he did, also called The Anthropocene Reviewed. So I think actually some of these might have been from the podcast, because I felt like his voice quality sounded different sometimes. I do want to reread this physical copy, and once again, highlight and tab. So that's the first one. The second of the 3 that I read was a memoir, and that is Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zauner. So Michelle Zauner is the lead singer, front woman, maybe it's just her, of the group Japanese Breakfast, which I actually hadn't heard of until I read this book. This was another one that I listened to, and I highly, highly, highly recommend listening to this one, because as you can maybe tell, one of the main focuses of this book is food, specifically Korean food. She talks a lot about Korean food and different types of Korean food. And I would imagine that when I reread the physical copy, I'm gonna have no idea how to pronounce any of the Korean words. So it was really cool to listen because she is Korean American, and so it was just so fun to hear her talk about those different types of foods. But this memoir is about her and her mother's relationship a little bit before, but especially during and after her mom is diagnosed with cancer. Her mom ultimately dies of cancer, and so it's really about caring for her mother and then caring for herself after her mother dies. It's about identity, and specifically identity as a mixed race person, and what does that look like, and how do you come to terms with a part of your identity when that main anchor is gone. Again, I listened to this as I was driving home. I sobbed, and then I got home and immediately hugged my mom. So this will do it for you. And then the last nonfiction in this top 3 is The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. I listened to all 3 of these actually, and I really recommend listening to them. All of the authors narrate each of these books. It's so powerful to hear these authors read their own words in their own voice. This follows and tells the story of a group of undocumented Americans that is rarely the subject of interest or focus. When we think about undocumented people, a lot of times we think about dreamers, who are a really important group to look at and learn about. But this book is about day laborers and these people who are here kind of just scraping by every day. They're maybe not as, inspirational as dreamers are, but that does not mean that their stories are any less important or powerful. The way that this book is set up is that Carla Cornejo Villavicencio looks at these undocumented Americans in different cities and how different events have impacted these different groups in terrible ways. So there's a chapter about undocumented Americans in New York City, and especially after the events of 9/11, and how these groups of people were impacted severely by those events. One of the other ones is about Flint, Michigan and the water crisis and how that affected people and the results of those effects. There's Cleveland, New Haven, and then Miami. I think everyone should read this book. It made me really angry. It made me really sad. So I'm a linguist, so I already understand, in a sense, the power of language, but just the power of equitable access to information, which means that information cannot just be spread in English. It needs to be spread in all languages, and that doesn't happen, as we see in this book. This is heavy, I will say. This is not a lighthearted read, but it is so important and it is so critical, so please read this book. An honorable mention for nonfiction, I did read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy this year. So good. Another one that I listened to. I decided I didn't want a physical copy because I don't know if I can reread it. It was such a powerful story, and I'm so thankful to Jeanette for telling her story, but it was honestly just really devastating and kind of hard to read. It's about her relationship with her mom, who, similarly to Michelle Zauner, dies of cancer. It's about Jeanette growing up as a child star and what that was like. It's about how that affected her career and her aspirations, and then it was just really hard. It was really good. I loved the way that Jeanette told her story. She tells her story from her earliest memories to kind of in the present, and in each memory and story that she tells it from her perspective at that age. It's just really compelling. You can tell that there's been a lot of unpacking done since that time and in the present, and that's kind of sprinkled in, but it's not this sense of well, this happened and this is what I know about it now. She's really delving into each memory and well, that's my best friend, that's my mom. I just think it's so interesting because even though the title of the book is I'm Glad My Mom Died, that's not a, I guess, central theme. She loved her mom, and that is so present throughout the whole book, which was really a huge struggle for her because of how difficult her relationship with her mom was. Again, another one. I did read that on the way home, and I got home and hugged my mom, thanked her for a lot of different things. Okay, last category is graphic novels. This is a genre I got into for the first time this year, and I loved it. I loved it. It was so good. It was so great. I'm so looking forward to reading more graphic novels this year. The first one of the 3 that I read and loved was Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe. So this is based on a webtoon that I believe there's a new one that comes out every week. I actually haven't read it online. This is a retelling of Hades and Persephone, kind of with like a modern twist. I am just absolutely obsessed with the color palette that she uses. It's these pinks and purples and blues. There's a little red. Each character is a different color, and it's just so fun. It's such a unique retelling, and I loved it. The next one that I read and loved was Sheets by Brenna Thumler. I picked this one up because of the podcast Books Unbound. This is one of the host Ariel's favorite graphic novel artists and authors, but then also I think just favorite graphic novels. This is the really beautiful deluxe edition. Again, this just has a stunning color palette. I mean, it's so beautiful. The pastels are just so good. This is about this young girl whose mother has died kind of tragically. Her dad has had a hard time emotionally since then, and so Marjorie, that's her name, has kind of the one who's been taking care of their family laundromat. And as she's taking care of the laundromat, she comes to meet a little ghost. Now, as you know, ghosts are sheets. And where else would a ghost go except for a laundromat with all of the fellow sheets? And so the ghost's name is Wendell. It's just a really powerful story about grief, about friendship, about moving on, and community as well. And it's just so good. And then the last one, this is kind of a crossover because this is both a graphic novel and a memoir, so it's nonfiction as well, and that is the Complete Persepolis by Marianne Satrapi. So this is the story of Marianne's childhood and then like adolescence and adulthood, growing up in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution. This is a time in history that I really didn't know anything about until I read this book. And it's one of those things where since reading, and I still do, I want to educate myself and learn more about the history of this event. This was such an interesting graphic novel. So it's just black and white. There's a lot of text really, but it doesn't feel like a lot. I love the illustrations. This was such a critical and serious time in history, but her voice is so, I don't want to say refreshing, but there would be something terrible and then I would laugh in the next square. Something really sad would happen like here, and then I would be laughing in this one. So it was just such a powerful story to hear, obviously from her own voice and experience, as especially a young woman growing up in this time. Her parents are very interesting. It was just really good. So I highly recommend this one. I've already given it to a few friends. They've recommended it to a lot of people, and I think this is like a classic graphic novel. Highly recommend. My last one that I love is called Soppy by Philippa Rice. This is the sweetest graphic novel about a man and a woman who meet, they start to date, and then they move in together. And so this graphic novel kind of tells that story. There's like very minimal text. It's mostly told in pictures, and it just feels like a warm hug. I am gonna buy myself a copy. I bought my boyfriend a copy for Christmas. It's one of those where I just want to like paper a whole wall with all of the illustrations. It was sappy, it was soppy, so it was really great. So that's it. Those are my favorite books of 2022. I would love to hear if you read and loved any of these as well. Please leave a comment, let me know. If there's any that you loved that I didn't mention, please tell me, because I would love to read those in 2023. I'm really excited to start this YouTube journey. I didn't mention at the beginning, but first upload. I just really love talking about books in like this long form format, and so I'm really excited to make more content, to make more videos, make some friends on here. I am on Instagram if you want to follow me there at Reading Rainbow. Please, this is so weird to do this spiel after listening to so many people, but like and subscribe if you want to see more of this cute little face too. He will be a frequent appearance, because if I am sitting or lying horizontally, he's there. He's all about it. So again, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.